especially at 2:30.
Well, hello everybody. It's a nice crowd. Thank you for coming. I just want to say that this is our 4th open house of this season. And can everyone hear me this way? No. Except for the video. It goes in and out. But this is the 4th tour that we've done, and it's all under the Rev250 Dutchess County project for the year. And it's been a big project, and what I want to say is that I feel like a lot of the history and life of central Dutchess County, that's the key, central Dutchess County, is starting to come to light, I think, because we're always concentrated on the riverside or New England as a whole, but Central Dutchess has a lot to offer during the American Revolution. Many prominent people lived in these hillsides. And in fact, last night there was a play up in Pine Plains, and it was about the Widows Pension Act. That was a terrific program. And also, and also 3 Saturdays from now in Armenia, there's going to be a program on the Loyalists of Central Dutchess. And so I'm going to pass these flyers around just as sharing, because the towns around Dutchess County have really been working hard this summer. The Historical Society is putting programs on and all. So these are some things that I'm just going to pass them around and you can glance at them. Just give a glance, and at some point I'll get them back, leave them on the bench, I think. So also, now this is our 3rd talk, and today Kathy Moyer is not a stranger to the Millbrook history community. She's worked a long time, extensively with David Greenwood, researching the Quakers of 9 partners, actually. And she's also brought a friend today who got her involved with the samplers from 9 Partners School, which she'll tell you the details of those, the whole process that happened, but it's wonderful. So Kathy was going to be a docent today, but then it developed into her giving this talk because she's had years and years of research on this, and why not? So finally, we're going to have the school that we keep pointing out. We have a banner about the 9 Partners boarding school, and it was just up the hill to the east here, and we have that banner, but we haven't really talked about it yet. So now she'll bring the school to life, and the teachers and the students. And some of the leaders that came out of 9 Partners School. It was a very influential school in its time. And then there's a bonus that after the talk, Kathy was going to take us out into the cemetery to look at some of the prominent resting places of various people involved in 9 Partners School. And I think let's see, the one last thing I want to mention is for questions, if you can keep your questions till the end, and then she'll answer them. So, without further ado. Yes, it's right. Let's try to keep it safe. A special surprise.
Okay, let's just get started. Thank you all for coming out. This is an important part of learning about what the Quaker world was like. Today we'll be learning about 10 years.
We can't hear you. Oh, is the microphone on?
It is.
Maybe you have to put it right in your mouth.
This is better?
Yes.
Yes.
This is big.
speakers facing.
We should be facing. Okay, is this better now?
You have to put it in the box, yeah.
Okay, all right, we'll start it over. Thank you all for coming out. I'm going to be talking today about some of the excerpts from my book, 9 Partners Boarding School. If I'm going too fast, slow me down. And if I'm blocking your vision, let me know, because I might be pointing to the screen at some point.
Can't hear it again.
Still can't hear?
No.
Is this better?
Tip it a
Tip
little.
it? How's this? Better?
Yes.
We'll learn. Thank you for your patience. Okay. The school that you'll see here is the best rendition by Alexander H. Coffin in 1820. And what I want you to notice, ladies, is we have an awning. That's our side. The boys don't. So you can tell right away this is a co-educational school. The awning over here. For the girls. None for the boys. So the girls were taught by female teachers with an assistant. The boys were taught by a male teacher and assistant. They were separate. You didn't go to class together. They lived second floor for girls, top floor for the boys, and down here was the dining hall where they would go for their meals. In the back, you can't see it, are there 2 playgrounds? Again, separate. They were divided by wood border so that you wouldn't be able to see one another. But guess what's in a wood wall? Not holes, exactly right. So those sneaky little boys would go peeking through the holes to see the girls. It was really a big deal. I mean, I gotta tell you the truth here. When you're getting ready to see somebody, what do? You primp. Well, ladies, it wasn't just us. Those guys were at the ears. Oh, is my hair done right? Is everything just right? They were looking and looking to make sure they were at their best when they saw a girl. They would only see her, they wouldn't talk to her, but they would see one. That was a big deal. Oops, that's not it. Okay, here we go. There are 3 things that we're going to be talking about today. Right down here is the historical marker for the building, 1780 Quaker House. Up here you'll see the banner that talks about the 9... Oh, am I slipping again? Is it getting weaker? Better? All right. 9 Partners Boarding School, which is up here to my left. Well, the physical foundation is no longer there. The educational foundation remains in terms of what the school accomplished, its legacy, and the 2 successor schools. The 3rd one is a marker that's in that direction, hop, skip, and jump down the road, and that's for the home of the Willises, who are the most influential of the teachers at the school. Let's start first with who the Quakers were. They were founded in England by George Fox in the mid-1600s. Their core belief is that there's a God or a divine presence in each of us. If you have that belief, how would there be any things like murder and pillage and looting and all those things? Well, you couldn't, because there's a God in everyone and you honored that. That's the Quaker belief. They had 4 testimonies. The testimonies were the way in which they believed and they acted. And you can always say, here's the saying, you can tell by a Quaker by what he does, not by what he says. So, their 4 core beliefs were in equality, in simplicity or plainness, in peace, and in truthfulness. They met every twice a week in silence, right here in this very building, and they would have sat there and spoke only if the Spirit moved them, because the silence was a time for you to commune with God and ask Him for guidance, and also you were in a spiritual communion with all of your fellow parishioners as well as God when you're in there. And this plane, go around this plane, that's because why? They believed in plainness, no distractions, you were there to worship. So there was no clergy, no sacraments, no singing, no nothing. Plain silence. Because that silence was foundational to the Quakers. If they really needed to solve a problem, they could be going into their inner selves, into the silence, and seek help and guidance from God. This is wonderful. This, what you see here, is part of learning more about the Quakers, who I think were undervalued and underappreciated because people didn't know their role, what they did. They were extremely influential up until the time of the Revolution in what they did for the country as a fledgling nation and nation to be. So they were very fundamental in anti-slavery. You hear all about that, and women's rights movements, and prison reform for Indians, and for civil rights movements. Those were the Quakers in action. They also, a little known fact, were very involved in the kind of things that helped to build the predecessors to the Bill of Rights. The Quakers in Rhode Island wrote a constitution for the state, and that was one of the models that they used for our Bill of Rights. So again, the Quakers were right there at the beginning helping us to build our country. And this is a wonderful idea from whoever got that great idea, to make 2025 the year of the Quakers. Come out to the meeting houses, learn about what the Quakers did, learn about what they believed in and how important they were to the country. So if you haven't gone to them, there's 3 more to see. They're open for 2 more occasions. Thank you, Dutchess County, for sponsoring it. New York Yearly Meeting consisted of, was really a pyramid. At the bottom were the local meetings. You got together every month. And the monthly meetings met quarter, and the quarterly meetings met once a year, so that the monthly meeting would be for the entire congregation to come. They would conduct business, they would have meeting for worship in silence, they would see one another, friends and family, have a great time. At that time, they would decide on what are we going to pursue for the year. And in this case, education was always an important one. How are we going to educate our children? Well, where are you going to educate them to? Because New York Yearly Meeting was, at that time, not just New York, it was northern Jersey and the western part of Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, and the southern part of Canada. There was a lot of people that you had to figure out where to meet. And the answer was location, location, location. Just like for realty today, so it was back then. Where would you go? Well, it just so happened that there were a lot of Quakers here. By 1780, there were more Quakers in this area than any place else outside of Philadelphia. Very amazing, isn't it? So, within all of the New York Early Meeting, 9 partners happened to be the most active. And the name came from the patent that was granted to 9 men by the king for a charter of land here in Dutchess County, which at that time also included Putnam County. The people who settled in here were very active, more influential and prosperous than some of their neighbors. They were very interested in education and aggressively pursued it. And they had the added benefit of being right here in what was now Millbrook, where we're standing. And that was great because they were far from Poughkeepsie, which was where the heathens lived. Oh my gosh. The heathens, you could sing and you could dance and music and gambling and cards and cursing. Whoa, all not allowed by the Quakers. So they wanted to have a place where they could maintain their religion, raise their children in an area which they felt safe. And this was it because they were far enough away from Poughkeepsie so they could be successful. Up there on that hill was the inn and the residence and the general store of Samuel Mabbitt, which was a beautiful place to live because at that time it was considered to be the finest dwelling in all of this part of New York State. So naturally, if you want to build a school, where are you going to go? Well, we already knew it was 9 partners. They're very influential, that's what they decided. So where would you go? Well, how about a big place that already existed? Can you sell? Wasn't so sure, but oh yes, he did. For 1,600 pounds, he was induced to sell. This building was half the size of the school. They built on the other addition up on the east side to be equal to what we now see and what you saw in that picture at the beginning of Alexander Coffin. This comes and goes depending on where I'm holding it, doesn't it? Yeah. I'll try to keep it right here. A sweet spot. Don't move. This is a color rendition. It was done by Eliza Jordan, the oldest one that we have of the school. It tells you the same thing with our awning ladies, so we always know where we go to school to enter the building. And what it says at the bottom is what we already talked about. It's equal educational opportunities, but they're separate. It's close enough to be there for convenience so everybody gets to see one another, even if you can't talk or anything. Oops. Okay. Right here was a little tiny hamlet that grew up around the central services, the blacksmith, the carriage maker, all those kind of people that you needed. And it became known as a mechanic at that time. The school and the church, and across the street was Thorne's General Store, and over here, that ways, if you want to hop, skip, and a jump, was the Mabbitt's house that I showed you the picture of. There they are. Thorne's General Store, founded by William and Isaac Thorne, which was in competition with Mabbitt. It was a happy day when he sold because now all the business went to them. And business it was, big landslide business, until the Dutchess Turnpike was built around 1804, and some of the people started to go to the heathen place in Gibson. What could they do? However, there was a bonus. In the early years of the school, the children were allowed on Sunday morning to go across the street and shop there. They were given money in proportion to what their parents paid in tuition. Can you imagine how many happy faces there were on Sunday morning after coming home from the store? Woohoo! Spend all your money right there. What was so revolutionary back then was that women were educated. At the time, the opinion of women wasn't too high. If you ever heard My Fair Lady Henry Higgins sing, women's heads are full of cotton, hay, and rags. The longer version of what they felt was I can read it to you. It was seriously maintained by approved authorities that women were possessed of delicate and tender minds, unable to endure for any length of time the strain of concerted thinking. Ouch! However, the Quakers believed in equality, so therefore women went to school. When the school opened, December 20th, 1796, it admitted boys 7 through 15, girls 7 to 14. And I want to point out a date, if you ever see it. This is something that you'll often find in contention. The school was laid down as a yearly meeting in 1852 because of financial problems that they were running into. However, the building continued to exist and it was leased out for another 10 years. So if you see 1863, 9 partners as a school of the yearly meeting ended in 52. A big distinction. Doesn't sound like it, but there was. The official name of the school is down here. Catalogs what few exist is called Friends Boarding School. I will always talk about it as this, and you'll always see it written this way. The school that was here after 9 Partners closed as a school for the yearly meeting was called 9 Partners School. So it was very confusing. Very confusing. Tuition was only £16 initially. It was a very progressive education. And we continue to see separate but equal for all of the educational opportunities. Again, this was for the children of the yearly meeting only. Education combined at that time the Quaker religious training with the most up-to-date academic disciplines. In other words, it was cutting edge at the time. The Quaker belief was a guarded education, meaning the moral development and practical learning was in a healthy environment. This was healthy because, don't forget, in the old days when epidemics wiped out big parts of the cities like New York or Philadelphia, you would want to live there. It was pretty unhealthy. Here, in the outskirts of civilization, you only had yourselves. It's a lot more healthy physically as well as the mental capacity to be away from the heathens. The basic tuition was £18 in 1799 for spelling and reading, but you could pay more to get any more courses that you wanted, which at that time were writing, arithmetic, grammar, and math. Now here's the part that was different. Girls learned everything that boys did, except the boys went on to learn something that they thought would help them in their future careers or as farmers, and they went off to, say, for example, surveying, while the girls did sewing, because that was a necessary thing that girls had to learn to maintain their household. Otherwise, the same thing. Again, the boys were taught by men, etc., and this is one of the other big problems that the school faced. Pernicious books, don't you love the title? There was a committee for the entire length of this time the school existed whose only job was to look at books. Something that was bad, censored. Something that was bad, banned. Something that was bad, removed from the kids. No Shakespearean, no novels, no nothing. They were very, very particular about what they wanted the children to read. And if one of the kids snuck in something that was banned, they found it, they would confiscate it. This was an ongoing problem, like I said. Pernicious books, that's one of those Quaker terms. Here comes another one, straightened. They believed in educating the lower class because equality, and they had a permanent fund set up for tuition assistance. And what they did was they called it children in straitened circumstances. They didn't say they were poor, they said straitened circumstances. That was how they referred to them as.
Excuse me, would you repeat that?
Straitened circumstances. The children who were poor were called, or the parents were called, living in straitened circumstances. I'm sorry that this keeps going in and out. The school was run as a family with the superintendents as the heads of the house. It was a home away from home because it was mostly all boarding school. If you were local, you could walk to school, but mostly it was boarding because this was the yearly meeting school. You came from all around the yearly meeting. The most important thing here is good moral character. Wouldn't the world be a better place if the last several decades have been stressing good moral character over any other of the courses that they teach? Now, of course, you did learn the 4 R's back then, reading, writing, arithmetic, and religion. But overall, it was good moral behavior. Discipline was more in the nature of positive reinforcement. The Quaker schools were modeled after Ackworth, which was the first school that was built for the yearly meeting, and it was over in England. They were draconianly, horribly harsh in their punishment. Whoever dreamt up the kind of discipline they had should have been removed from the Quaker society because it was inhumane. So the Quakers learned to take the good, which is the structure of the schools, and the bad, which is don't do draconian punishment. So there was no whipping, no deprivation, you can't have anything to eat or to drink today because you were a bad kid, none of that stuff. It was more positive reinforcement. As the whole educational movement in the country progressed, so too did 9 partners. We were getting more into what you would call a preparatory school education, so they featured classes like botany, chemistry, and astronomy. Attendance fluctuated. Yes, it started out around 100, but they had bad years, it might be 47. It was up and down. It was never a steady number. Because again, the biggest ongoing struggle was money. Not a surprise. Here were the most of the well-known teachers at the school. Jacob Willis and Deborah Rogers, they met at the school. They were students, they both became teachers, and they became head teachers. And they had such good teaching methods, and they were so good at teaching, that the school became known far and wide across the country, which of course the country didn't extend to California back then, but it was still a big country, and they were noted. It would have been called a top-tier school back then, in today's language, but very well-known school. And Jacob was a mathematician, and she was a grammarian. They got married in 1812. Love at school. Many of them got married that way. Here's their house, down that way, a hop, skip, and a jump. He wrote textbooks. This is one that is arithmetic and 8 nature too. And you'll see here that they learned a lot of fancy stuff. Things that I'm not so sure I ever learned in grade school. Progression, geometrical progression, and permutations. If you have ABC, how many ways can you change them into CBA, ACB, etc., etc.? The geography, I've got to read you the name. This is the name of what they expected to study. A description of the earth and of the manners, customs, religion, government, manufactures, commerce, and curiosities of the various nations who inhabit, to which is added plain directions for constructing maps with illustrated plates and an atlas. Whew.
Wow.
That's been the longest title ever, right? The world.
Yeah.
But they covered all that. They covered an amazing amount of stuff. They expect you to know these things. I've only picked out 2, but I bet if I read any of them to you, how many of us could answer them today? What mines are there in Tennessee? Describe the face of the country in Delaware. What is the climate of Rhode Island? Name the principal rivers of Louisiana. You might have a couple of those things, but this is just a bit of a sample. Here's an actual one. I'm going to pass it around for you to look at. It's well worn with age. It's 200 years old. Can't do both. Here's how you do maps. He also wrote a bookkeeping. This is another thing that you often hear about. It's called the Catechism for short. And this is about 10 pages in which the children were taught the 4 Quaker beliefs. They were taught truthfulness, simplicity, peace, and equality. And in this were things that gave them examples of what to do. And this is why you saw so many of the children who were educated at the school go out to become activists for some kind of rights, civil rights, women's rights, no slavery, etc. Because they learned it all right here in this book. Well, they learned too by the way people conducted their lives and their conduct, of course, as well. Oops. The most famous person from the school, Lucretia Coffin Mott, she attended with her sister, Eliza, then only called Coffin. They came from Nantucket, a long, dirty, dusty journey. Now notice they came from Nantucket. That's not New England. That's New England, that's not New York. And that was because the yearly meeting school in New England had failed by then. And they wanted to send their children to a good place to get a good education. And they weren't going to go to Philadelphia. The closest one was New York, because there were only 4 yearly meetings in existence at that time. New England being the first one, Philadelphia second, New York third, and Baltimore fourth. So they came down, they went to school, she became a teacher. She was an assistant to Deborah Rogers, the woman that we just saw, unpaid in August of 1808. So she must have wanted really to learn how to be a teacher. They didn't pay her. She met her husband, who was a teacher at the school. She became a teacher. They fell in love. They got married, moved to Philadelphia in 1811. She was very petite in her size, but she continued throughout her life to be an outsized figure in terms of her outspokenness for women's rights in particular. So she was very instrumental. Now I'm going to tell you about whaling. You associate that with Nantucket. But there also was whaling here. They dragged the whales up, towed them, up the Hudson, and they rendered them in Poughkeepsie. So the men were gone for years sometimes on these expeditions whaling. And they had other businesses they had to attend to. Their father, Thomas Coffin, was gone a great deal. So the mother, Anna, had to take care of their store, their family boarding house, and the school. So what did that mean? That meant she had to know how to do mathematics and reading and inventory and all those things, which was another reason why the Quakers were very big on educating females. It was practical, it was equal, it was necessary to give them the education they needed to take over when the husbands were gone. And eventually some of them died and they had to carry on that way too. They were both very influential. You don't hear much about him, but he was one of the ones who was influential in the founding of Swarthmore College, associated with the Quakers. Very, very big names. The most important name that everybody knows is Susan B. Anthony. She was inducted in the very first Hall of Fame, the Women's Hall of Fame ever, in 1973, and the priesthood followed not long after that as some of the most influential names. She didn't go to school there, no. Her father did, and her 2 aunts, Susan and Anthony. Her father became a teacher. So we know that the Quaker things that he was learning were passed on to his children. Susan B. Anthony's name was Susan Brownell Anthony, named after her aunt, Susan Anthony Brownell. Some of you know what the B stood for. Very influential in their day. A name you don't know is the Brown name, the Gould. Gould Brown was a student at the school. He also became a teacher. The reason he is so well known days gone by, but not now, is because he was a grammarian. A grammarian is a linguist who is concerned about the structure of the English language, the syntax, the punctuation, the parts of speech, which you had to know because don't forget, when the school opened in 1796, things were not that standardized yet. Spelling had only really gotten to be standardized 2 decades earlier. So they were really big on grammar to teach everybody correctly. If you ever read some of the archives of the school, which I've had to do, boy, it's hard to understand. There's one period for the whole page. And they speak a very flowery Quaker speak with these and thous, and it's difficult. So here's what he wrote. A grammar of the English grammar called the most exhaustive, most accurate, most original treatise on the English language ever written. That is impressive, is it not? And he went to school there. Deborah Rogers was a grammarian, and she assisted him, and he paid her very high praise for the work that she did to help him out. His sister Lydia was a student. If there was a movement, she was right there in the fray. You could go to her. Anti-slavery, women's rights, temperance, you name it, she was right there working on it. Now, the money part.
Yeah.
When Lucretia was a student, she noticed that James Mott was making double what Deborah Rogers was making. And that wasn't right. Equal rights, right? Equal pay. No! 9 partners did not have equal pay. There are not a lot of surviving records for the school. You can't say, go find me the list of all the students, the list of all the teachers, and the curriculum that was ever in there. No, that doesn't exist. I have to pour through an awful lot of records for thousands of hours to find out these little juicy facts, which includes this one. So what happened was, she went, you can't do that. And they said, well, so what? That's the way we do business. I'm sorry, she's still going to get half pay. So, in 1812, Jacob Willis and Gould Brown, the 2 men we've just seen, got a full $300. Deborah Rogers, the head teacher, got half of that. And the two girls, Mary and Sarah Mott, only as the sisters were paid 100. They wwere the sisters of James Mott, who the preacher married. Okay, see all the connections of all these families? They were very involved in school. Allison has future talk here. I've got about 4 of them lined up now. Does this look plain? Of course it does, but this is what they wore. No ornamentation, no jewelry, no anything that would delineate status or fashion or anything. Plain was the egalitarian thing to do. So, that meant, girls, if you were wearing too many ribbons on your latest frock because it was a fashionable thing, here come my scissors, snip, 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 off they go. If your clothing was objectionable, they would alter it, dye it. If they couldn't make it better then, they'd make you all new. They billed the parents, of course, for everything, because they were very serious. One of the ongoing problems, the 3 that they had for the life of the school, was attire. They sent home notes to the families, please dress your students appropriately, and they'd come back with something inappropriate. So don't think, if you were wearing something that was, say, silk, which was a very expensive fabric, and the person down the road from you was wearing homespun, that showed that you had more money. Nope. They want you to be equal so that there was nobody feeling like you're lesser, you're superior to the other person. Therefore, your attire had to reflect it. Plain, plain, plain. You ever think of the word for Quakers? Remember the word is plain. Plain, plain, plain. This is Sarah Willits Collins. Okay, it's just so much. I'm going to go over my quota. How much time do I have left, Allison? Am I good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll cover it in the next one then. Samplers. The samplers were fabric that the girls used to show their mastery of embroidery and motifs. And there were some that were unique to the Quakers in 9 partners, being plain, and they were always in there for simple, meaning no fancy stitching, no bright colors. You're not going to see anything that's going to knock your eyes out. The value of the samplers was not only the practical, you learned how to sew, you needed to know how to do that, but also because they were decorative. Hang them on your wall, you frame them, and who knows, a man might be coming back to court one of your daughters and say, wow, what does she do? I want to court that girl. She knows how to sew. It could happen. Probably did. Most of them were done at 13, but they were done from 7. How many of you would give your 7-year-old daughter a needle and tell her to embroider, huh? Well, back then, that's what they did. So you notice the age of 20? Yes, they did allow older students. They also allowed them younger. This happened gradually. If you had a 6-year-old and 11-year-old daughter, you would send them both to school, because when the 6-year-old got lonely for mommy, she'd go to the 11-year-old who would comfort her, and she'd feel better. So that way you could give both an education. They came a little bit older too as the school progressed into more of a progressive education, a preparatory style. This is a verse sampler. The verses that they used were the pious or religious, because it was hoped that as you sewed this pious verse, you would take into you the kind of values that it was trying to give to you, so that when you were living your life, you would know how to be morally and behaviorally acceptable at school. Then you would take those morals and values into your home life when you got married, into your church life, and into the greater community. Whether or not they succeeded, we don't know, but the goal was, if you give them a religious verse, they might have a shot at learning something to take it in and become more of a moral person themselves. They always were enclosed in a border, which framed the design. In this case, a wavy, undulating border, which was common to the school. Sarah Southwick, her great-great-great, whatever they were, immigrant ancestors. Sarah Southwick was a descendant of Lawrence and Cassandra Southwick, who were persecuted. Remember, the Pilgrims came over, and the Puritans from England, for why? Religious freedom. Well, they're coming a couple dozen years later, the Quakers, doing what? Religious freedom. Now, the Puritans didn't like it. Here come the Quakers. No, you're not free. You can't have religious freedom. Guess the irony? You denied religious freedom. The people came after you that you came here to seek. So, the Quakers had to move. They went down to Rhode Island, and they came down to Flushing, and then up through the counties into Dutchess County. So they suffered greatly because of the persecution at the hands of the people at that time, because they were thrown out of the area, left to die. It was horrible. This is an example of an alphabet sampler, cross-stitch, where you show the sampler done with the alphabet in upper and lower case. Very plain border, which is typical. But what's unusual here is that they embroidered the name of the town and the county as well. Her sister Persis did the same thing. This is a masterpiece. Whoa, this will knock your socks off. She did it at 10, all this. Isn't that impressive? Not one but two verses. The alphabets at the top. She used a wavy leaf border to encompass the entire design to divide the two parts of the verse and the top from the bottom. Now what's new here is the rule to mark napkins. This is unique to Quakers and some of New York's as well, but this is a Quaker thing. The numbers were used to help you with rotation and inventory of your linens, because don't forget back then, linens were really important. They were passed down in wills. You couldn't go down to the nearest Walmart and say, I need a new frock or an apron. No, no, no. Everything had to be done somehow in your local community and by yourself. So the top line was for the last name. The second line was for the initials of the first names. So Mary Collins was the daughter of Isaac Collins and Rebecca Budd, and her sister was Elizabeth and married Robert Pearsall. These were three of her maternal uncles, and never figured out who those two were. Did you get? So if anybody knows who those two people are, let me know. We're still searching.
Relatives.
Pardon? Okay, Mary Collins was the aunt to the man who married the woman that we saw that mannequin in the couple slides back. Mary went to school at 9 Partners. When the school closed, the children started to go upstate to where the next school was held for the yearly meeting in the Finger Lakes called Union Springs. The Collins family was very involved there, active on the board. And then after that, when the school had an unfortunate fire and burned down part of their main building, they had to figure out, where are we going to go? Should we rebuild here, or did the geographic population of the New York Union League shift again? Well, yes, it did shift again. They looked around and decided, well, here it was. Dutchess County is the center again of the Quaker population. So they decided to buy the Coleman Farm in Poughkeepsie. It became Oakwood Friends School. And the Collins family continues to be active on the board as major donors to the school. So they've had over 100 years of being associated with 9 Partners or its 2 successor schools. A really good long run. Ooh, music too. This is an example of a medallion sampler. The center at the bottom is called a cartouche. It's a wavy vine line encircling the initials of the girl, usually the year, not necessarily always. At the bottom are 2 half medallions. On the sides we see different motifs that she's embroidered, and I'll give you a hint from my book. That's the most popular motif that I've seen sewed on the girls' samplers. What you can't see so well are the birds. They're very faint on these leafy branches and pots. Another very popular motif. Look at the one on the right-hand corner down there. Ah, there it is again. They were not told what to embroider where. It's just pure coincidence that I chose 2 that happen to have the same thing in the same right-hand corner. This example was done by Catherine Weaver, and she incorporated this half medallions up the sides, so there's less room for the other motifs. The one that has just the one set is very unusual, and thank you, Allison Meyer, for bringing to us, in the flesh, so to speak, the Catherine Weaver sampler owned by the Milburn Historical Society. She'll leave that out for you afterwards to look at it in person. So it's a beauty. I'm so glad they were able to acquire it and take such good care of it. The legacy of 9 Partners is that they were co-educational. They believed in equality of the genders and of the creeds. They were able to let in non-Quakers in other years. They were also very cognizant of and trying to help out with any assistance that they needed. The lesser unfortunate children, the straitened children didn't have much money. They were very active in teaching reform. They were very active in, you name it. If there was something out there, whether it was anti-slavery, women's rights, civil rights, you name it, they were very active because that's what they learned. That's how they put into action their beliefs that were instilled in them in those 4 basic testimonies. Philanthropy was another one. They were taught to make sure they helped to give to whatever they needed an organization at the time. So you would have found the Quakers to be at the head of founding or being involved in early societies that were doing something like manumission societies. And they continued to be very involved for years. 9 Partners was the first successful co-ed and boarding and day school in the country. No longer in existence, obviously. I'll have a cemetery tour afterwards if you care to participate. You don't have to go uphill if you don't want. You can just look at the graves right just around the corner in the front. First, we'll look at the sundial. This was calibrated by Jacob Willis, the mathematician who did everything you can think of. And it was cast in bronze by John Wing, who was the grandfather of John D. Wing, who attended Nine Partners in 1846 and bought the school. After they no longer had enough money to keep it going in 1863, they tried to sell it at auction, it didn't go. John Wing said, my old school, I think we'll buy it. So he did. Made a lovely home for it, decided he needed something better, and he built an incredible mansion. He had the oxen haul half the school up the hill. The other half stayed behind as a barn. So while I still have the microphone, a couple of highlights about the cemetery. The people who were buried there first had no markings because the Quakers believed in plainness. So if you go over there to wherever you see, and there's nothing there, that could be because that's where they had the people buried originally. They next progressed to having sometimes a stone with maybe an initial on it or a date. It took till around the mid-1800s until they began to permit gravestones as we know them today. Mostly more plain, but they were permitted at some point. The first one was 1807, and we're up to about 3,000 burials now. And it is, again, for people who are in the non-Quaker as well as the Quaker faith. I'm still working on my book, so if you know anything about the school or the samplers, let me know. If not, I'm going to say thank you very much for your attention. Glad to see you all here today, and ask if you have any questions. No questions? This is a question. Okay, we do. Yes.
I don't believe this house is being used right now for any meetings.
He's asked if there's any meeting that meets here. I think the Poughkeepsie meeting is meeting here.
No, there's a Millbrook meeting that meets here on Sundays in warm weather.
In warm weather.
Oh, because it's not, and that, I guess it's through the month of September, Louise?
Yes.
Through this month.
Oh,
But there are, in fact, the 4 on the tour are not currently in use, correct? That's correct.
As far as I
And
know.
there are still Quakers, I'm a Quaker, there's
Yeah.
other Quakers here. And there's
Number of
Quaker meeting
Quakers in
houses,
this
if anybody wants any information about that, see me or those 2 women over there.
Nancy,
And Jonathan over here.
Nancy, do you guys meet here at this meeting house? The Poughkeepsie meeting, do you meet here?
We're at
No,
Bullset.
we all belong to the Bullset meeting that's up on Bullset
Right,
Road.
but
It's
you have a meeting over
Quakers
here
and
then?
Rest, but it's in Stanton.
Okay.
There's a meeting here in the warm weather on Sunday mornings at 9:30?
Sunday morning.
9:15.
No, 9 to 10.
9 to 10.
9.
So you can come, if anybody wants to, you can come next Sunday and.
No, next Sunday, sorry. Next Sunday, the angels are not in the area. I have a sign on the outside door, but the Sunday after, there will be a meeting here and until it gets too cold. And then we meet at the Lyle Community Church in their library from 9 to 10 every Sunday during the cold weather.
And when she says the angels, that's a surname of some people. It's not angels. Like, we're not crazy. We're not crazy yet.
Nancy's an angel.
Nancy is an angel.
2L
So bear in mind, you're sitting here in the same seats where thousands of us sat in silence. That's some of them from the kids across who were at school, some of them from the adults. And if you go upstairs, you'll find, just surprisingly, they engraved their initials, their cartoons, things that you would think. This isn't a very Quakerly thing to do, but they did. And kids will be kids. So if you think about it, this is the silence that they would have had for an entire Sunday or whatever day of worship they were doing, in silence as they communed with God. And you're right here today, participating in what would have been part of that practice hundreds of years ago. So thank you all for coming. Any more questions before we brave the weather outside?
I was just going to ask that, do you still have the silent meetings or do you have?
Yes, there's if you're moved to speak, you might speak. And again, it might sound unusual. It's not like people get up and scream and yell and chant. It's a peaceful reflection that is shared. So yeah, it's lovely. It's pleasant.
Yeah, the Spirit moves you, you could speak, and if nobody was speaking, that was okay.
Yeah.
But these were where the ministers would sit up here, and the elders, and if they had a thing that they wanted to speak about, they could. And if nobody spoke, that was fine, the entire meeting was in silence.
There actually weren't ministers. There weren't ministers.
There were in the early days.
Well, they were the elders.
The elders.
Who was it here? At the facing benches.
Back here.
Facing benches, yeah.
Right. Yes, you're right, yeah, in the early days.
I just want to mention one little thing. The Angel family that you mentioned. We just recently found out that the Angel family from here, very involved in the community of Stanfordville, I guess, and Upper Dutchess. They are like the 11th, 12th generation of the Bound family down in Flushing, who, anyone familiar with the meeting houses down that way, there's a long, long history that goes back to the 1600s with the Bound family, and they are direct descendants of that. So it's kind of neat. It just brings it all together in a big circle.
There's something I forgot, I wrote, I'll just show. The Quakers invented America, according to this book. There really are some great things in there that help you to understand, some of which we touched on very briefly today, how instrumental their beliefs were in forming the country. Don't forget, Pennsylvania was founded by William Penn, a Quaker, and the Quakers were heavily involved in Pennsylvania. And where was the center? Where was the heartbeat of our country? Philadelphia, and where? Pennsylvania. So they were very, very active in politics in those early years. And a lot of what they're discussing in here will reflect some of that. And the other ways in which the Quakers were very successful. It's by David Jones, I think. Yeah, YWNT, out of print. It's a great book because it surely demonstrates how important the Quakers were to our country and how people don't know it because there aren't so many of them left and they don't speak about it because, as I said over and over, you can tell it's a Quaker by the way they act, not by what they say, because the actions were more important. They didn't want to call attention to themselves. They were out there to do good for the people. Okay. Anybody else? Thank you again very much.
I want to thank Kathy for an excellent presentation. It was really good. And I want to mention also, as long as our video all goes fine, we'll have this on the Millbrook Historical Society website on our YouTube page eventually, pretty soon.
Oh, it looks good. This is Alfred Treadway and his wife, who is Catherine Hart Treadway. The Harts being, if anybody's from here knowing, the Harts of Hartsville were really one of the most important families that were settled in the early Millbrook days. And they, the Treadways, were not Quaker. Catherine was raised as one. However, what happened was that he was, as a doctor in town, and as the son-in-law of Philip Hart, who was the Philip Hart, he was considered to be such an important part of the town that they made an exception and let him be buried here. Number one, they let him be buried here as a non-Quaker, which at that time was not common. And number two, they let them be buried with tombstones, which was very uncommon back then. So the people here were symbols of what the Quakers stood for, with equality, but it was a little bit of a twist by saying, okay, we know that you're not a Quaker, so we're letting you here anyway. Now the graves around them you can't read too well are Philip Hart, his wife Susanna Aiken. That was a great love story. You heard the story? They didn't want them to marry. She was 15, he was an older man. He took her off on horseback and they eloped and they went and rode off and they were married forever and a day. And he called her his best friend. It's just a heartwarming story. If Allison's here, that's not one of my talks to give about the whole Hearts of Hartsville family. Also over here, there are more of them. They're not marked. I don't think you can see any more about the markings. One of them is for their son who died young. Right. If you would just wait here for a minute, I forgot to bring the rest of my papers with me, so I'll go get them and be right back. You can look at the graves and see if you can read the reading on them.
You can't.
Yeah, there's nothing.
Okay. There's very little opportunity to read this one. Can you read that? I cannot. I might be, I mean, you know. I can't even braille. Yeah.
Too much. Louise.
Well, yes.
Terrible diseases
There were
that
terrible
wiped out
diseases,
everyone.
that's true.
And people did that die and traveled with us all the time.
They did, yes. I'm not trying to see whether this is an actual stone and it's shale or something and that's how it's
ask the
that's fallen apart. Part of that.
I think she said yes.
Do you have a question? Shale.
No, but let's go.
But it wouldn't have been. I think this is Philip.
Can you make out the date on this guy?
Philip Hart was 1749 to 1837, and his wife Susanna Aiken was 1759 to 1829. She died first, and that was probably hers. And I say this is his because I'm looking at the pattern of this moss, which looks like it's this one.
1800.
And then one of these graves would have been William, who died as an infant, and Jacob, who was an unmarried son who died in 1824.
That would be these ones between them.
Yeah, don't know which is which, unfortunately.
These the earliest, Kathy, the headstones.
Well, his was unusually early because the Treadways died, let's see what year, probably can't read it on there. Oh, 1826 he died and his wife died in 1863. So because they died so young, especially him, they did permit the gravestones, but they were not the first people buried here. They were just the first ones buried with the gravestone. So those are the ones that we can figure out who's who because of the fact that there's so little that remains. And these really old ones are covered by moss, they're aged, they're weathered, the writing's all done. So we may be parking on some of the graves. I don't know if they buried them here so much as up the hill. Up by the fence and everything. Okay, we're going to go by the seat of our pants for most of this because I have not found some of these graves. I haven't had time to come here and explore. But we're going to head up this hill to get to the moss next. If we see along the way there's more Treadways, who probably would be buried in this area, but I'm not sure.
It's amazing how many of these early families, the names are still around, you know? I mean, it's still, they haven't moved away, right? The descendants.
Okay, up here somewhere are the graves of Deborah Rogers and her husband Jacob Willis, who died some years apart. And they were buried in little chicken-like graves about this big. They were really tiny.
She wanted to go to a Quaker retirement community, which
Outside Bucks County, Pennsylvania.
and so she was looking into that, and I'm not sure if that's going to happen. Did I hear that was not going to happen? I'm not sure anything at the moment. So you have to put a chunk being a single lady, and does that fit? Well, I mean, she has in Pleasant Valley, so she has support. She have something.
The problem is well, it also happens to be, and she's in the war for Quaker. It's fundamentally Quaker. It's established by Quaker society, peace, integrity, simplicity. So it's very peaceful. Yes. She could be like-minded. Well, there's that. I just don't. Especially when things are so.
She would recommend, if she would exist, like smile at somebody recognizing. I always love this one with the woman.
That's right. That's what they were saying. That's going to be a project. I know, but you look at the So I wanted to. You know what I wanted to do? I saw Lifetime Bennett's grave up here, which really we need to oh, the one, yeah. And I just said it's
Find them? Okay.
These are the graves of Jacob and Deborah Willis, who were the most of the famous of the school's teachers. This one in 1860, Jacob Willis, who died. And then over here, Deborah Rogers, his wife, who died in 1880. In keeping with their belief in plain, they're very simple, and as you can see, they're weathered. You can't read them anymore, but that's the way they wanted it.
Would be marble?
Is that good?
Wonderful. Yes.
It's a wonder they had stone at all.
Well, yes, they were.
Yeah, it would have been considered vanity.
Yes, yeah. Plain.
To be having stones.
Yep.
Actually, I've never seen a gravestone.
A square block like
I know,
that.
that's why they stand out so much. They don't stand out as in like this, but I knew what I was looking for.
Unusual.
And I had to find them.
down there.
Reminds you of a large corner marker.
Uh-huh.
What is
That's Willits.
I think the rest is
these are the Willits?
Holy mackerel, I gotta take a picture of that and get it fixed.
Amazing.
I should
think
bring
the
my
other ones
magic
are
cleaner here and clean them up.
This is a big cemetery.
It's still open, you know. I'm on the cemetery
Yes,
board.
it is.
Yep.
So I should have a flyer with me that
Yep.
says
Couple
anybody who
letters
wants
in
things,
Yeah.
2 for 1 today only.
Isn't this one strange?
I wonder if that should be a
I'm
project
looking
to
for
have
something
someone
that's
come and
reddish,
re-engrave them.
that's tall and pointy.
I imagine at one time
I
it was
don't think that would be really
all
desecrating.
Coffins, no.
Other coffins. There were other
Or put a
coffins.
little bronze
Yeah.
plaque,
Well, it was
add a
H
plaque
coffins,
to the back.
There was
Well, some fall down face
Face
forward.
down, right.
The, what's interesting is, I'm on the cemetery board. Coffins, literally, the coffins stuck in those ground. That tree is endangered hitting their meeting house. So we're planning on having that removed, which is really